A starving lioness stood in the ruins of her den, crying out for cubs that had vanished without a trace. Then a ranger claimed they'd simply wandered off, but the camera footage told a different story, a darker one. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The silence in the reserve had never felt heavier. Each footfall Rebecca made through the charred underbrush was like stepping into the hollow echo of a memory that refused to fade. Mara remained by the splintered roots of the fallen tree that once sheltered her cubs, her once powerful frame gaunt now, her breaths shallow, rhythmic only in their heartbreak. Her golden eyes, once sharp with maternal alertness, had dulled to an unfocused haze. She no longer roared, she no longer hunted, she only watched, as if waiting for something only she believed might still return. Rebecca stood 20 yards away, motionless, trying not to breathe too loudly. Any closer and Mara might lash out, not in aggression, but in panic. The lioness's instincts were unraveling, and no textbook on wildlife behavior had prepared Rebecca for the psychological unraveling of a grieving predator. "I should have relocated the den earlier," she muttered under her breath. Her assistant, Noah, stood beside her, jaw clenched tight, but saying nothing. They'd run the calculations, triple-checked the flood risk. The den had been just above the predicted waterline. Statistically safe. But nature didn't honor spreadsheets. 3 days ago, Rebecca had been analyzing footage of the cubs suckling, play fighting in clumsy bursts, their striped bellies rising with every breath. Now she scanned the drone feed for bone fragments. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her palms were blistered from clawing through wet debris with bare hands. Every snapped branch and scattered feather felt like a betrayal. What gnawed at her more than grief was the not knowing. Had the cubs drowned? Had scavengers gotten to them? Or, impossible as it seemed, had they wandered off before the flood and found some impossible sanctuary? That sliver of doubt, too small to justify but too persistent to silence, pulsed inside her like a splinter under skin. She approached Mara slowly, boots crunching against sodden bark. The lioness didn't turn. Her ears twitched, barely. Rebecca stopped within 10 feet and crouched, lowering herself to Mara's level. The wind carried the faint scent of decay, but no blood, no fur, no signs, just the absence, a void so complete it felt intentional, surgical. "You tried," Rebecca whispered, voice thick. "You did everything right." Mara's chest rose once, a shallow breath that trembled on the exhale. There was a protocol, of course. In cases of psychological deterioration, the Wildlife Board could mandate sedation, relocation, even euthanasia in extreme cases. Noah had already raised the topic once, carefully, gently. Rebecca had shut it down before the sentence finished. "No," she'd said, "she's not a case. She's a mother." Now, standing before that same mother who wouldn't move, wouldn't eat, wouldn't blink, she wasn't so sure. Rebecca remembered the first time she saw Mara. The sanctuary's cages were rusted, stained with years of neglect. Mara had been curled in the far corner, half-starved, her fur patchy and her eyes filled with something more human than most people she knew, resignation. But there had been a spark, faint, buried deep, that Rebecca had refused to ignore. She saw it again when Mara birthed her cubs, that feral, trembling spark of hope. Now, standing in this ravaged clearing, Rebecca feared she had reignited that spark only to see it extinguished. Was it cruelty, she wondered, to give an animal a taste of freedom only to have fate rip it away? A twig snapped behind her. Noah. He stepped forward, wordlessly handing her a scrap of torn canvas. One of the tagged radio collars. Echoes. It was shredded, as if torn off, not damaged by water. Rebecca's stomach turned. That wasn't flood damage. Something, or someone, had removed it. She looked up at Noah. He didn't need to speak. The same sickening possibility churned in both their minds now. This wasn't a natural loss. This was interference. Rebecca rose, the sorrow in her chest hardening into something colder, sharper. The cubs hadn't vanished into nature's indifference. Something had taken them, and whatever it was, it had just made the biggest mistake of its life. The sun had just begun to drop behind the tree line when Rebecca Holt stood ankle-deep in mud at the edge of the northern ridge, staring at the set of shallow depressions Josh Callahan had marked as fresh lion cub tracks. To the untrained eye, they might have seemed plausible, but Rebecca had studied these animals for years. The spacing was wrong, the gait pattern inconsistent with two healthy cubs on the move, and the claw imprints were too pronounced. Not lion, canine, likely coyote. Josh had either made a rookie mistake, or he was betting on everyone else making one. Rebecca's stomach churned as she squatted by the tracks, the metallic scent of pine needles and wet earth thick in her lungs. Josh hovered nearby, arms crossed, expression flat. His radio buzzed, but he ignored it. She noticed how he never looked directly at her, always at the ground, the sky, the imaginary tracks. Never her. "We need to move Mara here," he said again. "She'll follow the scent. It could draw her out of this spiral." Rebecca rose slowly. "She wouldn't abandon them, Josh. She wouldn't just leave if she knew where they were." Josh didn't blink. Instinct gets fractured under trauma. Even apex predators break. "So do people," she thought. She offered no reply and turned back toward camp, every cell in her body vibrating with unease. She didn't believe him. Not for a second. That night, long after the others had settled into uneasy silence, Rebecca huddled over her laptop in the surveillance tent, retracing every data point logged before the flood. Drone footage, motion-triggered trail cams, vehicle records, one clip from 2 days before the disaster caught her eye. A shadow passing near Mara's den just after midnight. Headlights. A vehicle, moving slow, deliberate. No license plate visible. But there shouldn't have been any vehicle there. Her team operated on strict schedules, and the off-road access gate was under lock and motion sensor. She flipped over to the logs, blank. A full 3-hour block had been erased. Her pulse spiked. Fingers trembling, she dug into the backup timestamp database. There, a ghost entry. Access granted. User ID J. Callahan. The air drained from the tent. She didn't move for nearly a minute. Just sat frozen, one hand on the laptop, the other clenched so tightly it ached. Josh hadn't found tracks. He had laid them. He hadn't searched for the cubs. He had taken them, and now he was trying to cover it up, with stories, with false hope, with suggestions that Mara's grief was a symptom of wild biology unraveling. But it wasn't biology. It was betrayal. She scoured his employment records. Wyoming. Before the Forest Service, Josh had worked security for a private zoo, Timber Vale Wildlife Experience. She remembered the name from a federal probe a few years back. Charges of unlicensed breeding, backroom deals, missing animals. The case had gone cold after the owners settled, vanished, or changed names. She stood abruptly, knocking over her camp stool. In the fire circle near the ranger lodge, she found him. The team was gathered, eating quietly. She didn't wait for privacy. "You stole the cubs." The words dropped like a stone in water. Josh's head lifted, slow. "What?" "You erased your vehicle logs. You were at the den before the flood, and you used to work for Timber Vale. I checked." He blinked. "This is insane. You laid fake tracks. You lied to get Mara away from the den, to finish what you started." The fire crackled. No one moved. Noah looked between them, jaw rigid. Josh's face contorted just enough, the flicker of a smirk before he masked it with wide-eyed innocence. "You're letting emotion cloud science, Rebecca. You're grieving and grasping." Her voice broke, but not from weakness, from rage. "She's not grieving. She knows. And so do I." Josh laughed, short and sharp. "You have nothing. You think the board's going to act on a few missing logs and a hunch?" They didn't. Not that night. The board said they'd open an internal investigation. In the meantime, Josh remained on assignment, and Mara continued to waste away, bones pressing against her skin, Eyes sunken, her great body curled like a question, without an answer. Rebecca returned to the ruins of the den alone. The storm had washed the scent of life from the soil, but she could still feel them there, hope and echo, as if some phantom of their warmth still lingered in the earth. She knelt beside Mara, whose breath was shallow, her flanks barely rising. "I will find them," she whispered, fingers brushing the lioness's shoulder. "I swear to you." Mara didn't move. But hours later, as the stars pulled taut across the sky and frost whispered through the grass, Rebecca woke to silence. Mara was gone. She had risen in the night, not frantic, not desperate, but deliberate. Alone, she had vanished into the wilderness, walking a path that no one else could follow. Rebecca stared into the darkness Mara had left behind and felt, for the first time, the full weight of despair. Not because she was alone, but because she might have been too late. The third morning dawned brittle and cold, with wind sharp enough to draw blood if you stood still too long. Rebecca Holt hadn't slept. Her hair was matted with sweat and ash from the fire she'd kept burning just to stay awake. Her eyes were cracked dry from hours staring at screens, maps, and GPS overlays, trying to find something everyone else had missed. Most had already moved on. The board wanted quiet. The team was told to focus forward. Even some of her colleagues, good people, had begun speaking of Mara in the past tense, as though her disappearance was a merciful end. But Rebecca knew better. Mara had walked into the wild with purpose, not defeat. She hadn't given up. Not yet. And neither would Rebecca. The breakthrough came when she reanalyzed the vehicle route logs from the week before the flood, cross-checking against an analog field map long discarded by the digital archive. A route, rarely used, half overgrown, led to a long decommissioned ranger station at the reserve's far edge. Power had been cut years ago, but its supply shed still existed. It was just outside the range of any active cameras. That was all she needed. Rebecca made the trip herself, moving fast, alone, the wheels of her ATV biting through mud and gravel. The forest pressed close, silent, tense, as if holding its breath. When she arrived, the old shed sat like a forgotten grave marker, its roof sagging, padlock rusted and half snapped. She pried it open, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear. Inside was darkness. And then movement, a rustle, a whimper. Two small bodies crouched inside a reinforced crate, shivering. Hope and echo. Rebecca dropped to her knees, breath cracking open in her chest. The cubs recoiled at first, skeletal from dehydration, their fur matted, eyes wide with weeks of fear. But when she spoke softly, "It's okay, babies. It's okay. I'm here," they stilled. A tremor passed through their frames. Then the smaller one, Echo, crept forward and touched her outstretched hand with his nose. A soft sob escaped her throat. Relief didn't come gently. It came like a rupture. Next to the crate were papers, crisp, freshly forged documents, authorizing transfer to a private collector in Texas. They were stamped with a false ID and a payment ledger, over $70,000 logged and waiting. Blood money, and a death sentence, if she'd been 1 day later. Rebecca radioed it in. Wildlife authorities arrived within hours. Josh Callahan was arrested at the southern checkpoint, caught trying to leave early. The look on his face when he saw her was not fear. It was disbelief. He had underestimated her, thought she'd burn out or break down, thought she'd stop where the system told her to. He hadn't understood that Mara's fight was her fight, but the cubs were only half the promise. Rebecca brought them back herself, bundled in thermal blankets, nestled against heated pads. They whimpered the entire trip. At the old den site, where life had once been erased by the flood, she set them gently into the grass and backed away. She took shelter in a camouflaged blind, heart thundering, watching through the lens with the patience of someone holding her own breath hostage. Time slowed. The sun began to sink, bleeding into the ridge like an open wound. The wind rose, tugging at the dead leaves like ghosts trying to speak. And then a sound, low, primal, known. A growl echoed across the basin. Rebecca sat up, tears already starting. Mara emerged from the tree line like a vision called back from the void. Her coat was ragged, her body thinner, but her eyes were alive. She froze at the edge of the clearing, every muscle drawn taut. Then she saw them. The growl turned to a cry, a raw, broken sound that fractured the stillness. Mara ran. Not a sprint of panic, but a surge of instinct that came from something deeper, something soul-deep. She reached the cubs and collapsed around them, mouth open in a soft roar that bled into a whine. She licked their faces, their ears, their bellies, as if trying to erase every second of the silence between them. The cubs mewled, crawled into her warmth, and wrapped themselves around her like they were trying to crawl back into the womb of safety. Rebecca wept as she watched. It wasn't biology, it wasn't instinct, it was something else. Something language failed to touch. It was reunion. It was resurrection. The next morning, a new motion-triggered camera captured Mara and her cubs standing together atop the ridge, silhouetted against the rising sun. Rebecca uploaded the footage to the reserve's public archive. Within hours, it went viral. There she was, Mara, once caged, once nearly discarded. Now a sovereign mother in the wild, her cubs beside her. And Rebecca, the girl who'd once waited in vain for a promise to be kept, had made one and honored it. I will come back for you, and this time she had.